It's like everything is in your fingertips. And then the power comes from your arm and your back. For some reason, it's popping up in my mind, like the famous picture of E.T. like touching. But it's like that.
Welcome to another Tonebase YouTube interview. I'm your host, Ben Lottie. I'm a pianist and head of piano here at Tonebase. It's a real treat to be joined by pianist Avery Gagliano, winner of the 2020 U.S. National Chopin competition in Miami. You'll recognize her from her success at the recent Chopin competition in Warsaw. She was the only American to make the semifinals, but I was rooting for her for more than patriotic reasons. She plays with clarity and nuance and elegance and really organic expression. And actually, Avery, I wanted to start by thanking you personally for your exquisite voicing. I heard so many lines that I don't usually hear. Is voicing something that you're particularly attentive and sensitive to when you're practicing?
It is. And I will say that, especially since these pieces that I played in the competition are works that I've lived with for quite some time, it's especially important to always discover something new. So I find it very interesting to find new voicings, even if it's not something that ends up on stage all the time. To me, it's fascinating.
First round, you're in the wrong note etude, the penultimate phrase of the A section. Okay, Avery brings out this tenor voice in her left-hand thumb, and I checked the score. Chopin actually marks two of these notes. I think it's an F sharp and an E in the left-hand thumb. Avery brings out a line from G down to D sharp, and then when it returns to that final phrase, the D sharp turns into the wrong note. Do you even remember what I'm talking about? Was this a conscious thing?
It was, and to me, it fits. It completes the line.
It seems like that's one of your priorities. I mean, in the third Ballade, I heard so many, not just inner voices, just voicing in general, and not random, but always with a sense of shape and direction.
First of all, you have to have a clear idea of the music and the general direction and the structure. And then you can take the time to really enjoy and explore all those details and take it apart layer by layer. And then once you've taken it apart, you have to piece it back together in a way that's comprehensible and that maintains that flow.
I had one other voicing I wanted to mention. It's not technically an inner voice, but it's during the twinkly part of the Andante spianato. You know, it's coming down. Everybody brings out that inner voice in the alto, which Chopin doesn't actually mark, but you have to bring it out. You bring it out the first time. Then after the chorale, when the twinkly comes back, you actually do what Chopin says, and I don't hear anybody else do it. Do you know what I'm going to say?
I know what you're talking about, those Ds.
Those Ds. Nobody brings out the D.
But he wrote them. He marked them in the score. I was listening to a masterclass Ari Vardy gave, and he kind of told a story about those Ds. He said it was almost like the clock is striking 7 times. I never thought of it that way before, but I think, Chopin marked it for a reason, and I think it's beautiful that way.
Well, I just had to indulge you on those two moments, but let's take a step back. Tell us a little bit about your experience in Warsaw. In general, did you feel Chopin's presence when you were there?
I definitely felt Chopin's presence. I mean, what an incredible 4 weeks. Everybody always said, oh, Warsaw's amazing. And everybody comes together for this competition and it's really the heart. But I never understood it fully until I was there and living it. And I was just blown away. The people love Chopin and love music and culture so much. And to be in an environment where you feel that camaraderie, where you feel that everybody is in this together, was very special. And I got a few chances in my spare time to visit some Chopin landmarks. I went to his statue in Wajianki Park, and I also went to the church where his heart is and had a little moment there. That was the day before my first round. So it was just very special.
So I understand you have a new CD coming out. It's being released by the Steinway and Sons label entitled Reflections, and it includes works by Haydn, Chopin, Schumann, and Thomas Adès. Can you tell us a little bit about the concept for this album? Who or what is being reflected?
Myself, basically. When when you take a look at these pieces, these are all pieces that I've worked on throughout various stages of my life. The Schumann Abegg variations, for example, I learned early on, and it's actually the piece I auditioned to Curtis with back in 2015 when I was 14 years old. So it really is a reflection of my journey as a musician and as a pianist. And it takes me to a reflective place because it allows me to look back on all of these experiences that have really shaped who I am.
And you're actually joining us from your Curtis dorm room. And it sounds like Abegg variations were your ticket into this school. Can you just talk about like when you're actually playing it? You know, does it bring back the memories? Do you feel that you've grown with the piece?
Every time I come back to this piece, it's very nostalgic because I have such a strong opinion of how the piece should be played, and yet as I change and grow, sometimes I discover new things, such as new voicings, right? What's interesting for me, especially, is I notice, for example, technically, how things feel different now than they did when I first learned the piece, and my technique has changed so much. But at the same time, I can remember what it was like struggling with some variations at the beginning. And then some things are still difficult. It doesn't matter how many years you spend with it, it's still going to pose the same problems and challenges.
Are there specific aspects of your technique that you consciously watched evolve? Like, do you have any specifics? Sound, control, just different aspects that maybe would have made your Abegg at age 13 or 14 sound different than it does on your album today?
I would say coloring and sound production is something I'm always striving to work on and improve.
Now, one of your teachers, Gary Graffman, shameless plug, tonebase artist. So is Ari Vardy, by the way. So 2 shameless plugs here. Go watch their lessons on tonebase. I asked Gary in our minibar happy hours what Isabella Vengerova taught him. What did she impress on him when he was your age? And he said sound.
What were her strengths as a teacher?
Sound. She hated an ugly sound.
Is Gary focusing on sound when you work with him?
Gary focuses on sound. Gary also focuses a lot on what is in the score and allowing his student to respect that while also giving them the freedom to express their own artistic self. And I think that's what makes him such a wonderful teacher, is that he never tries to fit you into any mold, but he allows you to explore your own expression. And so all of his students have such unique ways of playing, but what ties us all together is the way we're able to look at the score and notice the details and respect what the composer has written. And I will say Bob McDonald does the same thing, and he's really wonderful that way too.
I know Bob from Juilliard, and he's a kind of a musical doctor, isn't he?
Yeah, Bob has a very hands-on approach, and he works a lot on technique. But what I say is, by addressing technique, he addresses all other facets of playing. And so he's able to look at you when you play and know what's at the root of the problem. And when I say root, I really mean the root of the problem, because once you solve that, then everything else it's like magic. It all starts working a million times better.
I once had a masterclass with him in Brahms' B major trio. And there was some octave passage that I was playing like crap. And he just came up to me and he said, "You just need to go in here. Why aren't you going in?" And I went in, and suddenly it was easy. And I was like, how did you know? What did you, like, most teachers don't come up and say, just tweak this, and then suddenly it's better. It feels better. Do you feel that with
I
Bob?
do all the time, and it's amazing. They are such minor changes. Sometimes it's the smallest of things, just the way your weight on your hand or your arm shifts a little bit, or just the timing of all of that when you strike a note. It just totally changes everything.
I could tell you were doing something with your
Yeah,
hand.
the in thing.
We have confirmed Avery does have arms and hands, although you can't see them, but they're there. Now, rewind a little bit more. We're talking about teachers, and I'm curious about your earlier foundation. How did your teacher Marina Alexieva help you in sort of creating this foundation, which has proven so fruitful?
What I'm most grateful to Marina for was that she never gave me a piece that was beyond my capability. She never pushed me to be more than what I was. What I mean, for example, is I have very small hands. She never gave me pieces that required me to overstretch. When I was studying with her, at least in the first few years, I couldn't reach an octave. And so she was very conscious of that when she selected pieces. She also always helped me choose pieces that she felt were fitting to my character and my personality. Things that she knew I would enjoy playing. That was very important to her, is to never break your student's spirit, but to preserve their love for music. And that is hard to find in teachers sometimes.
What were some of the other milestone pieces that she gave you that sort of were the right piece at the right time?
Before Curtis, I learned the Rachmaninoff Corelli variations, and I remember that was a big step for me because I'd never played Rachmaninoff before, and obviously it demands much more pianistically. And for someone like myself with small hands, that was another leap for me.
There's this myth that you can't play Rachmaninoff unless you have big hands.
Yeah.
I always point to Alicia De La Rocha's Rock 3 or anything Ashkenazi plays. These people have baby hands. What does it feel like playing Rachmaninoff with small hands? What is your reach? What are the sort of tricks, or what is the technical approach that allows you to play with such command and authority and sort of avoid the difficulties of these large spans?
It's not avoiding the difficulty. There's no way to avoid it or get around it other than, for example, I break chords depending on where it is on the keyboard. So I just have to break things. Sometimes I take things with the right hand or split it between the two if it fits. Sometimes it's a little more of a struggle, but I make it work.
I don't even notice when I listen to your playing that you're doing all these broken chords because of your hand size. It just sounds natural.
Well, that's really the point, is that the music always drives it. And so when I play, I don't think, oh gosh, I have small hands, but I'm just thinking, how can I make this sound good, and how can I play what I play and just make music?
Staying with your background, but moving away from your teachers, that's a kind of direct influence. Let's talk about your other influences. You grew up with a lot of different music around you: classic rock, pop music, of course, classical music. You studied violin as well as piano. Can you talk about these eclectic influences and sort of how they shaped your musicianship in general?
Well, I grew up with all of this music in the house. My parents aren't musicians, but they love music, and so I was exposed from the very beginning to all these different genres, and it gave me inspiration, and I still listen to all this music today, not just classical music. In terms of pop, I actually write pop songs myself for fun as a hobby.
Let's talk about that for a minute. So what do these pop songs that you write sound like? Because I just know your musicianship from, your ballades and scherzi and nocturnes and mazurkas. I imagine the pop music you write doesn't sound much.
No,
like
not at all. It's really, when you think of pop, that's what it is. It's just two chords at the piano, very simple stuff with melodies, and I write lyrics. And the goal is to find a producer, hopefully, and publish. That's the dream, I will say.
Now, are you going to change your name to some kind of pop star name like Lady Gaga, or are you going to keep Avery Gagliano?
I thought about it, maybe save Avery Gagliano for the piano, for classical piano, and maybe come up with a stage name for pop.
Maybe Lady Gagliano.
Right, if I can get away with that, sure.
You mentioned that the classical influences didn't really have any impact on how you conceive these pop songs. When did they start for you? And were they like lyrically driven? Was it about expressing something in words? Or was it about the vibe of the pop genre?
Well, the first song I ever wrote, I remember I was about 13 years old, still in middle school, and a friend of mine who wasn't very close, but she was more of a classmate, had committed suicide. And at that age, I didn't really know how to deal with it. It was I was just trying to understand it and process it. I mean, we were both so young, and for some reason, my intuition was to write a song. And so, to answer your question, yes, it was driven by this need to express something. And I could do that through both the lyrics that I was writing and also through the music. Now, when I write, it's often music driven. Usually, melodies come to me, and I explore that and I think about what theme I want to build around that. But sometimes I have a concept and I think to myself, okay, I want to write about this, and the music comes after. So it's a little bit of both, and I think there's beauty in the flexibility of it all.
When I think of pop music from a purely musical standpoint, I think of 1-5-6-4 harmonic progression. Do you find that that's kind of at the core or a basis, and then you steer around it, or do you just avoid, this kind of convention?
It's a balance. There's definitely your standard pop chord progressions, and then because I am conscious of the fact that they've been used a bajillion times, I do sometimes try to find other avenues, and I might land on a chord and think, okay, I know this is going to resolve here, but maybe I could go somewhere and take it in a different direction.
Miami Chopin competition was right before COVID. So this must have been like you're on cloud nine, and then suddenly every concert is canceled. And so was that related to your turning back to pop music and developing new songs?
A little bit. For me, writing pop music is a completely different mind space than classical music. Classical music requires such precision and focus. And with pop, it's almost the opposite. It's just letting the creativity totally take control. And for me, it works best when I'm in a very relaxed state and can just let my ideas populate and take me wherever. And so, because of the pandemic, because all of a sudden I had no responsibilities to classical music, I just had all this inspiration suddenly, and the ideas took off. And maybe it was the time being quarantined and stuck at home with my family as much as I love them. I was just ready to let go of some things. And so that the ideas came, and I was writing a lot.
It seems like you can much more directly express your sort of everyday life experiences and feelings through this medium, unlike classical music interpretation, right? I mean, it's so dependent on the score, the composer's intentions, trying to reveal what they are expressing. So do you kind of feel like when you're a classical musician, it's less about yourself and more about the music? And when you're a pop musician, it's actually more about yourself and less about the details of the music?
In a way, yes. And maybe that's why I'm so drawn to pop music as well. Maybe that's like my yin and my yang, right? I have one place where I can be literally personal and put everything into words. And then on the other side, I have this opportunity to express and put my personality and emotions into somebody else's work. And so between the two, then you get the full spectrum of who I am as a person.
Your love for singing predates your piano lessons, though, right? I mean, you were singing coming out of the womb, it seems like.
Yes, I was singing in daycare, so my parents say. There were reports.
Is it true you knew all of Sound of Music, every number, when you were 18 months old?
Pretty much. That was the first movie I watched, and I've been a fan ever since. I just love to sing. What can I say?
The elephant in the room here is that you're giving a little recital at a kind of important hall pretty soon, And I wanted to plug that. If anyone's in New York City and you've heard of Carnegie Hall, Avery will be playing there at Weil Recital Hall. Can you tell us, when is this concert and what are you playing on this program?
This concert is on November 30th, and it's being presented by the National Chopin Foundation of the United States. I will be opening the program with Bach's A minor English Suite, followed by Beethoven Sonata 109. The second half is all Chopin. It features Chopin's first Ballade in G minor, the E minor Etude Opus 25 number 5, the B major Nocturne Opus 62 number 1, the Opus 56 Mazurkas, and to finish the program, the B flat minor Scherzo.
I wanted to ask a little bit about the first Ballade. Everyone knows it, everyone loves it, everyone wants to play it. You managed to pace yourself and not get too crazy in that A major climax in the middle of the piece. Do you have a narrative in mind when you're playing the first Ballade? Do you have a sense for that overarching structure? And how the hell do you play the coda so well?
Two good questions. I don't have a narrative in mind, but I am very conscious of the arc because it's one of those pieces where it's very easy to lose that sense of structure. And so I have thought a lot about how each part connects and fits and relates to each other. In terms of the coda, the infamous coda, slow practice is the key, and I've spent many, many hours just working through it slowly, hands separately, bringing out the melody. I think it's very important not to just play it like a cacophony of notes, but it is melodic. It is beautiful music, as intense as it is.
Do you have to just get floppy? Because like I practiced it a lot. I play it okay, but I always get tired and tense like halfway through it. And I think it's these stupid things. How do you make sure you're staying loose but also accurate?
Well, I get tired too, and it requires stamina, but I would say ideally that your arm is relaxed, but your fingertips still maintain that intensity so that you get that sound. You don't want your whole arm to be tight, but fingertips are really like, for some reason, it's popping up my mind, like the famous picture of E.T., like touching. But it's like that. It's like everything is in your fingertips, and then the power comes from your arm and your back. So for those keeping track at home, you want to play this whole coda to Chopin's first Ballade better, just watch E.T., and that should help. But I'm glad you said that because I noticed you play with such great posture, and there really is a sense that from your shoulder to your fingertip is a kind of single unit. Are you actually conscious of that, like that you're sort of moving as one unit when you're playing, and how does your posture sort of support that? Posture is important to help be relaxed. It's also important just for stage presence in general. People don't like to talk about it, but what you see affects the impression that your performance gives. In terms of movement, I've never really picked apart my movement. Obviously, I think about it in terms of how it affects my playing and sound and technique. And then part of that is just intuition and something that comes naturally. And that's why every pianist moves differently. So you mentioned stamina, and you're playing the Bach A minor English suite. Here's a piece that requires stamina. I mean, the 4 or 5 minute prelude, just nonstop. Are you conscious of sort of preserving your energy when you're playing this work? Not preserving energy, but concentration, because the thematic material repeats so much that it's important to always be in the moment and really think about how to vary it and to bring out voicing. That's so important in Bach's music. And going back to what we were saying before about voicing in Chopin, I think a lot of that stems from my work studying Bach's music, which I really love and enjoy. And in fact, the first thing after the Chopin Miami competition, the first thing I learned and played was the Bach suite, because I was like, I have to get my hands on Bach just for some mental clarity and to just recenter myself after all of this Chopin. So yes, in this prelude, it's very difficult because of the perpetual motion. And so it's what helps me also is to be organized in my thoughts and the structure of the piece, to know the A and the B and the return, because that's kind of your roadmap, and so you don't get lost in this cycle of notes.
And those sequences in the second or third page are just like the most beautiful.
They're so beautiful.
What do you do when a passage is so beautiful, you just want to savor every moment, but you know you have to play it cool, right?
Yeah.
You can't.
Oh my goodness.
It's about that balance between just, I want to milk every moment. I don't want to leave this measure ever, but you have to. It's part of a big landscape.
Sometimes I run into places like, for example, in the third ballade, in the middle, there's the one part. It's just da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-dum, pa. Every time I get to it, I'm like, what can I do with it? And sometimes I spend hours just practicing and playing it a million times, trying to milk everything out of it. And then ultimately in the performance, you just have to, like you said, you have to play it cool. You can't overdo it. But hey, in the practice room, you can enjoy all you want.
I just want to talk about Beethoven 109 for a sec. Perhaps his most beautiful piece. Nobody ever says that about Beethoven. We don't think of Beethoven in terms of beauty. Of course, it's beautiful, but it's everything else that Beethoven brings to the table. What is special and challenging and unique about this piece for you?
The soulful quality is so special. And what makes it challenging is how the movements, and also within the third movement, the variations, how they all relate to each other. It's incredibly important with this piece to have a clear structure. It's a deceivingly difficult piece, and it's hard to control.
What is so challenging about these variations? Because they're so sublime, they're so special, and they seem like they're very approachable, but they're really not.
What's challenging is that they all require very different technique, and they're all so different from each other. So approaching each variation is like approaching an entirely different work in a way. But of course, you have to tie them all together.
That's what people say about Beethoven sonatas to begin with. Each one is their own universe. So it's almost like within this universe of 109, there's all these mini universes.
Little galaxies, right? And so it is very important to have a clear sense of even that space in between variations, how much time, how as a performer in that moment, you're able to transition and get into the right character and mindset for the next variation.
There's this sense that we want to be profound in a piece like that.
But then if you're trying to be profound, you probably never are. So do you feel like just the subtlest little timings can suddenly make a simple phrase into something extraordinary?
Absolutely. I mean, timing is everything, and it does come down to those milliseconds sometimes, or just the way you breathe, that can change everything.
Well, you have wonderful control over your milliseconds in all of the pieces that I've heard you play. I'm a recent new fan of yours. It's really just been wonderful watching, your success in the Chopin competition, and looking forward to listening to the album. I unfortunately can't make your Carnegie Hall debut, but I hope that some of our listeners who are watching and in the tri-state area can buy a ticket and show up. One last question. how do you get to Carnegie Hall?
The Amtrak. It's nice being in Philly and you're only an hour and a half train ride away.
All right, Avery, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for joining me and for joining Tonebase for a really wonderful conversation. Best of luck to you.
Thanks so much.